I'm often asked about adrenal fatigue and if the concept or the idea of adrenal fatigue, I put it in quotes, adrenal fatigue is real. So I will say this, when it comes to the idea of adrenal fatigue, there is Addison's disease. Addison's disease is a true autoimmune where the adrenal glands lose the ability to make cortisol. Absolutely. But the idea behind adrenal fatigue is really misleading. The adrenals do not just give out. They are not like the ovaries going through menopause. They do not run out of cortisol. It's not how they work. Now, when you have adrenal issues, I absolutely agree that you have all the symptoms. You're tired, you're burnt out, you can't get going, you're often in pain, you're struggling mentally, 100%. But the adrenals are under the direction of the brain. So the way the hpa-axis works, the way the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis works, is that your hypothalamus in your brain is your master controller, and it gets all the feedback in to decide if you need cortisol or not. It releases a hormone that then goes to the pituitary, and the pituitary then sends a signal down to the adrenals that says, make cortisol. So you make cortisol. Now, if you're trying to protect yourself, if you have long-term stress, long-term pain, long-term inflammation, maybe you're on a medication such as a steroid inhaler, steroid nasal spray, you're on an opioid pain medication, all of those send the feedback back to the brain to stop making cortisol. And so the brain does. The brain says, all right, halt production, and the adrenals halt production. So result, cortisol levels go down. So people will often misunderstand their low cortisol levels for, quote, adrenal fatigue. And while it's true they're not making very much cortisol, it's actually at the direction of the brain. It's the brain that tells it what to do. So when we're addressing the hpa-axis, when we're talking about treatment and what to do, we actually have to start up high at the brain. We actually have to start with things that are brain supportive, blood flow, oxygenation, herbs and supplements that are brain supportive, because that whole cascade in the HPA system just goes downstream and helps the adrenals to make cortisol to help make you feel better. Now, there is a feedback loop that not many people realize about. When you have high cortisol for long periods of time, you have a negative feedback loop. That high cortisol feeds back to the brain to say, okay, I'm done, don't make any more. And so now you go from high cortisol to low cortisol. So sometimes people will say, well, a couple years ago I had really high cortisol and now I have low cortisol. It must be adrenal fatigue. Like, no, your adrenals didn't give out. What they did was give the signal to the brain that you've been making high cortisol for a long time. Your negative feedback loop kicked in, and as a result, your levels went down.